This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's podcast. And as we often do, we have a very special guest with us this week, and someone who's been around a long time working with leaders and offering all kinds of wisdom. Bob Tiede from Cove has been with them for over 50, I think about 54 years, and has, I'll just say, I know him as the question guy, as we'll see in a moment. But Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Richard, it's absolutely my pleasure to be with you today.
There are just a lot of folks that I really admire, Bob, that have just been at it a while and faithful and serving and whatever God put in front of them and learning and growing along the way. And you certainly are one of those people. Tell us, if people don't know much about you, tell us a bit about your journey, because this is a leadership podcast, and I'm fascinated by the many different ways that God puts leaders together through their life journey. And what's that journey been like for you?
Wow, well, thank you. I'm a farm boy from South Dakota. I went off to the University of South Dakota, quickly joined a fraternity, and about 5 or 6 weeks later on a Monday night, came down to dinner, and there were some fraternity men from Iowa State in our living room. Well, we introduced ourselves, the doorbell rang, not the doorbell, the dinner bell rang. We all went in, and our president said, "Tonight we have some special guests. You've probably met these men. They're all fraternity men from Iowa State, and they're also involved with a student Christian movement called Campus Crusade for Christ. They're going to be our Monday night speakers." Well, after dinner, all 50 of us went in the living room, and I could take you to the place on the floor where I was sitting. 3 of them shared how they came to know Christ at Iowa State. The fourth one shared the 4 spiritual laws. Richard, I'd never heard anyone my own age talk about so clearly inviting Jesus into their hearts. And obviously my heart was moved, and when the speaker said at the end, "I'm going to pray a prayer out loud and invite you to pray along silently to invite Jesus into your heart." Well, that started my journey. 3 months later or so, I was at the Big Ten Christmas Conference for Campus Crusade for Christ. And the last night of that conference was New Year's Eve. And I still remember the speaker said, "Many of you come from campuses where we don't have staff. We're praying that God will call many of you to lead the movements on your campuses. If you're willing to do that, I'm asking you to stand." Well, Richard, I remember standing. I knew almost nothing. And of course, you probably heard the greatest ability we have to give God is availability. Well, that's the only one I had. And I share that story because when people say, "Well, Bob, how were you called into ministry?" It wasn't that night I knew I was called to ministry, but that was the first step. And every step since then has come from that. Well, we've been on staff now for 54 years. My wife also became a believer through Cove. Of course, it was called Campus Crusade for Christ then. First 8 years in campus ministry. And then in 79, the national director of Cove at that time played matchmaker and brought Josh McDowell and myself together. And for the next 24 years, I directed the Josh McDowell Ministry, which is a division of Cove. And of course, the analogy of on a Navy ship, there's a captain, there's an executive officer. The role of the captain is to be focused outside the ship for opportunity, danger, but focus is outside. The executive director focuses inside, and that's really the relationship. Josh, the visionary, and my focus was inside. We saw our team grow from a team of 8 to over 150. And again, we could fill podcasts with stories of when the doors to Russia opened and Cuba and all the things we saw God do. But in 2003, after 24 years, we stepped away from that role. We took a sabbatical. And when we came back, Cove brought us 7 opportunities. But the opportunity of those 7 that we felt called to was leadership development. And I've been on the U.S. leadership development team since 2004. Now, Richard, it's a great team. This is not Bob by himself. But starting then, our mission was developing the next generation of leaders for Cru. And our elevator speech, I actually say, is true of every organization. And that is, in 15 to 20 years, almost none of your current leaders will still be leading. In their places will be the leaders you're now developing. But if you aren't developing them, well, your company, your organization, it won't fail tomorrow, next month, next year, but it may fail 15 to 20 years from now. And history is filled with these stories of organizations once vital, top of their game, 15 to 20 years later, may not even exist or a shell of themselves. And so it's the stewardship of the leaders God's given you and preparing them to lead. And one of the fun things, and this is a praise, you may know that this last year, Cru named a new president. David Robbins is our new president. He's the fourth president of Cru. And it's very exciting to know that David was in that first leadership development initiative from 2005 to 7. So that mission of developing the next generation of leaders, praise God. But that's some of my journey, Richard.
Wow. Well, Bob, I mentioned that you are, I sort of see you as the question guy, and you've got lots of books. We'll have them all listed in the show notes. One that I got to write an endorsement for, and now that's a great question. You've got 340 questions Jesus asked, 260 questions Paul of the Apostle of Christ asked. Great leaders ask questions. Leading with questions, success unlocked. You've written a ton of books, most of them at least touching on or highlighting questions. And so, Bob, tell me what is so powerful about asking a good question?
Well, Richard, you'll know the answer to this question. Who is the greatest communicator in all of history?
Yeah, well, I'm going to guess Jesus. When in doubt.
I realize it begs the question, but that is the right answer. And even when I'm talking with secular groups and ask that question, they almost always get it right. And I share, even if you aren't a follower of Christ, couldn't we all learn from the one who's reported to be the greatest communicator ever? After all, he started a movement 2,000 years ago that's still signing up recruits today. And so what could we learn from his communication? Well, Richard, I shared earlier that I'm a farm boy. I don't think many deep thoughts, but one day I had this deep thought. And it kind of went like this. Wouldn't we imagine that the person who can write a complicated computer program with all the code might be the person who would know how to best make use of that program? I mean, you and I might use it. We might only be using 30% of what it could do. If we sat with the programmer, he or she would say, well, Richard, Bob, it also does this and this and this. And we would say, wow. Well, the scriptures clearly communicate, even the first chapter of the Gospel of John, that everything that was created by him. And so the deep thought was, wait a minute. If Jesus created us, designed us, wired us, programmed us, might have he made use of that programming and how he communicated? And the answer was, well, duh, of course. Well, the two pillars of his communication were stories and questions. And I began to think, the fascinating thing about stories, Richard, when we hear a great story without writing it down, without saying, well, I got to memorize this so I can share it later, stories are just sticky. We hear them and we remember them. Do you think Jesus knew when he shared the story of the Good Samaritan or the prodigal son that people would leave remembering? Again, of course. But then he asked questions. And one of my books, and I always like to point out, it's not authored by me. 340 Questions Jesus Asked is actually authored by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It says on that title, compiled by Bob. Well, in the NIV, if you add up all the questions Jesus asked in the four Gospels, plus the one from the book of Acts, where he asked Saul, "Why are you persecuting me?" there's 340. And you begin to see, wow. Now, Richard, you and I ask a lot of questions because we don't know the answers. That's why we ask. The Lord Jesus never asked a question because he didn't know the answer. So he must have had another reason. And, what has occurred to me, and it's the reason questions are so powerful, is did Jesus understand that asking a question where you answered or I answered had more power to change us than if he said, "Richard, let me tell you."
Yeah.
It's like, well, sure. And why is that? Because when we answer, we own our answer. We think it's our idea. And our own thought has a greater likelihood of changing us than when somebody says, "Let me tell you." Well, that's some of the reasons that questions are so powerful. Um, let
So
me go.
let me ask you, if
Sure.
you're talking to someone, maybe a young leader comes up to you and they're new recruit for crew, or they're a young pastor and they're struggling, and they come up to you and they tell you maybe they're having a hard time right now as a leader in their role. For a lot of us, I mean, and you and I know this, all the training that we had in our education, we were trained to make statements. We were trained to put sermons together, to say things in a profound way, that memorable way. Most of us, I dare say, were never taught to ask good questions. So this young person comes up to you, and I mean, anytime someone comes up and starts telling you all the problems they have, our first instinct is to start giving answers. Well, God's on his throne, and this will work out, and have you tried this or that? But so this young person comes to you, and they present that they're struggling. What kind of questions, like what would the master question person ask someone like that?
Oh,
Give us some tool. I mean, you have a bunch of
yes,
books that will
yes.
do that, but give us a sample of, like, what, instead of immediately telling them what they should do, what kind of questions might you respond with?
Well, the first thing I would respond with is, "Hey, tell me more." Because I've discovered that so often, Richard, we hear something and we immediately want to jump to telling.
Mhm.
And again, I've found that so many people are polite. They don't actually say, "Well, Bob, that really wasn't what I had in mind," or "That really wasn't my question." They're just polite. And you spill out that quick answer and they say thank you. And then they re ask and you realize, oh, you missed it. And
Yeah.
so, hey, tell me more.
Hmm.
And, that tell me more may actually lead to a second, a third, a fourth question, not an interrogation, but usually within every answer, there's something you could say, "Hey, say more about that." And
Mm.
there's a great value in just listening to people,
Mhm.
just hearing them. Everybody likes to be seen and heard. And then before jumping to advise, "Hey, Richard, what do you think might be the way forward on this?"
Mhm.
And and again, so often they actually have a way forward. They just need to be encouraged.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll, let's say I hear that and I'm thinking, I'm not sure that will work. Instead of saying, "Hey, I don't think that'll work. Let me tell you what you ought to do." I'll say, "Richard, that's one option. What might be a couple more options?" And because so often that first option we go to is something we already tried that didn't work.
Uh-huh.
But when we encourage them to think more options, they're actually plowing new ground.
Huh.
And now there may be a point at which they say, "Well, Bob, Richard, I'm really stuck. I'd love to know what you'd suggest." And then I may tell, but I would also, in telling, saying, "I've got some experience, but not exactly like yours. But in a similar situation, here's kind of how I handled it." And so often they'll immediately say, "Oh, yeah, I want to do that." And I'll then go back to asking, well, Richard, your situation's a little different. How would you apply that to your situation?
Hmm.
And again, in a gentle way, ask some more questions to draw them out.
Hmm.
Uh, one of my favorite scriptures on asking questions is let me look here. It's in Proverbs, and by Solomon. He said, "A person's thoughts are like water in a deep well. Someone with insight can draw them out." And
Hmm.
so, just understanding that as a leader, drawing those thoughts out of somebody, listening, um, even that, "Hey, what do you think you might do in this situation?" Um, also communicates that you respect them. It's
Yeah.
not like, "Okay, I'm the smart person, you're the dumb person, so I need to tell the smart person needs to tell the dumb person what to do." And,
Yeah.
they actually feel devalued in the process.
Hmm. Well, I found too, people, if they know that you're a leader, an author, a speaker, they'll respect you and they'll want to know your opinion. But and sometimes we can think, well, I've had some success as a leader. I've got some experience to share, but I think you do need to keep that humility to be reminded. But I haven't had their experience, and I've never been a mother, and this is a woman asking me,
Yeah, yeah,
or I've never been in that situation. Or I didn't grow up in an abusive home life, and so yeah, some things are going to be similar, and principles will be maybe the same, but it's not going to be exactly the same, and so to give them the freedom to work it out in their context, I think it takes a certain humility. I've just found, as you said, there are times where you'll be talking to someone and within 2 minutes, you think you can begin to see the answer already. And you could tell them, you say, "Hey, listen, let's cut to the chase here. I think I know what you need to do." But if you take another 20 minutes and let them discover the answer themselves, there's just so much more ownership, so much, because then it's one thing to say, "Yeah, I talked to Bob and Bob told me what I should do." It's another to say, "As I was talking to Bob, suddenly God showed me what to do." And
yes,
boy,
yeah.
that's a world of difference.
Richard, one
Well,
of my friends, he said this so well. He said, when you tell somebody what to do, that they might write it down, they might remember it, they might even try to implement it. But he said they'll never own it.
mm,
But he said when you
yeah,
ask a question and they make the decision or suggest what the answer is, he said they own their answer.
yeah,
And some of this, Richard, it's not just asking questions, which it is, but if you can helicopter up just a little bit, and I am no expert on emotional intelligence, but just understanding, which I believe the Lord Jesus did because he asked all these questions, understanding that their answer to your question has a greater likelihood of affecting positive change than you or I telling them what to do.
yeah, yeah. Well, I found too, and it's a humbling thing because, and you've had this many times as well, but people are coming up to you asking a question and they're prepared to change their life over what you tell them. And I've had people, I mean, they might quit their job. They might go on a dangerous mission trip. They might do a lot of things because of the advice I gave, and that's a huge responsibility. And I mean, just quite honestly, I'd rather, if they're gonna make a huge sacrifice, I'd rather it was because God told them to and not
Yeah.
Richard told them to.
Yes.
I don't
Yeah.
want them to come back to me later and say, "I lost the farm doing what you said, Richard. I need can you help me, fund that?" It's like, "No, don't sell the farm unless God tells you. Don't sell the farm just because Richard thinks it's a good idea."
Yeah.
This is gonna have to be a God thing. But, just as you lead in general, why is asking questions, why is that gonna just make leaders better leaders? I mean, I know that on a one-on-one scale, you help someone out, that makes sense, but just being the kind of person who's always thinking in terms of questions, how is that going to make a leader better?
Well, Richard, when I speak, one of the things I share is that a leader who leads with questions can be up to 10 times more effective. And to illustrate that, I always ask one of the audience members to come up. And on my PowerPoint, I have 2 slides, but you're my audience, Richard. So I'll ask you. And the first question is a silly question, but the first picture is a big rowboat. And there's oars for everyone. And I say, Richard, this is your team. As you can see, everyone's got an oar. You're the leader of this team, and you want to get that rowboat across the lake as quick as possible. How many of them do you want to have row with you?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah.
All of them. And I say, it's a silly question, but Richard, I'm going somewhere. The next picture shows your same team, but now they're gathered around your conference table. And the word opportunity is written on the table of that photo. And I say, now, Richard, listen carefully. If you're a leader like I used to be, and I used to be a benevolent dictator, I thought the job of a leader was to figure out what needed to be done and then was please and thank you, ask your staff, tell your staff what to do. So, Richard, if you're that benevolent dictator and there's an opportunity on the table, and you think it's your job to figure out how to take advantage, and then you're going to tell them what to do, how many mental oars are in the water?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just you, just one. But if you're a leader who leads with questions, so you say, hey, gang, here's this opportunity we have. And then kind of looking around the table, you ask the whole team, what do you all think we might do here? What are the odds, as you begin to hear from that whole team, that one of them might have an idea better than anything you were thinking?
Yeah. The odds are pretty good.
It's not a guarantee, but just
Yeah.
hearing more ideas.
Yeah.
And so let's just say, Richard, across the table sits Sarah, and Sarah shares an idea, and you immediately think to yourself, wow, that is way better than anything I was thinking. So you look at Sarah and say, Sarah, love your idea. Sarah, would you be willing to lead our team in executing on that? Richard, how hard will Sarah work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whose
Yeah.
idea is she executing?
Yeah.
And
Mm.
and again, another scenario is the whole team begins to add in. And we could do this, and we could add this, and this would help. And now the whole team has their fingerprints on the plan.
Mhm.
And again, emotional intelligence of understanding as the team all puts their fingerprints on it and owns it, they are all going to work a lot harder than
Yeah.
if they hear from their leader, Bob, and Bob says, here's what I need you all to do. And they're thinking, well, he signs our paychecks. We better do what he wants. But they're thinking inside, I don't think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it just is never going to get the same energy. And so
Mm.
that's a little bit why a leader who leads with questions can be more effective. Number one, they're hearing more ideas. And
Mm.
number two, they're allowing the good ideas they have for staff to execute on those ideas, which are their ideas. And so they own them.
Mm.
Just a few thoughts there, Richard.
Yeah, and I found as a leader, I don't necessarily have the best ideas. Most of the time when I've had people come into my organization and see what we're doing, it was someone else's idea. I just, as a leader, I just recognized it was a good one. And this very podcast was my son-in-law Sam's idea, not mine. I'd hardly even listen to a podcast when we started this one, so it hadn't even crossed my mind. But I think that's one of the roles of a leader. We there's a stereotype that a leader comes charging in on day one and starts barking out orders and coming up with solutions and putting out memos. And we sort of feel like that we need to be a strong leader that knows where he's going and what he wants done. And I've always just found when I came to a church or wherever I came, I was wandering around just asking a lot of questions. Like, obviously, this place I know this place. We probably don't need to stay where we are right now, but I'm curious how we got here. I'm curious what decision, what led to us at the time feeling like this is what we need to do.
Yes.
And when I understand that, then I can start asking, well, then what you've been here a while. What do you sense? And what are you seeing? And what have what have we tried before that was a disaster? And you could save me some grief by sharing that with me. And it's a whole different environment. You can't. At some point, you have to lead. At some
Yeah.
point, you have to sort of
Well,
mobilize and say, "Let's go with this idea, this suggestion," but let's equip people. But some of us, people, Type A sort of driven people, we tend to go too quickly, and I find that by asking questions, it slows me down just a little bit and makes me a little more cautious and prepared and better equipped when we do finally move forward.
well, Richard, as you shared what you did as you moved to a new church, it reminded me, uh, Navy Captain Michael D. Abershoff, when he took over command of the USS Binfold, one of our nation's modern warships. I don't know how the Navy measures morale, but morale on that ship was the lowest of some 300 vessels in the U.S. Navy. 18 months later, under his command, retest of morale was the highest of all ships in the U.S. Navy. Well, the first thing he did upon taking command that helps us understand how he turned that morale around was he set up 300 one-on-one meetings with the 300 sailors on his ship. Each meeting was 15 minutes, and he asked them 3 questions. And the 3 questions were, what do you like best about this ship? What do you like least? What would you change if you could? And at the end of the first day, he might have only had time for 10 of these 15-minute meetings, but there was a buzz on the ship. The new captain, he's different. And as he heard their input, it didn't take long. Now, he didn't promise to make every change that he heard or was suggested, but it didn't take long. And he's hearing things and thinking to himself, what? What do you mean we're going to fix that? But when he began to announce changes, called all the sailors together for a ship meeting, guess who he gave credit to for the ideas? The sailors. If you'd been a sailor on that ship, Richard Blackaby, stand up. In our meeting, you shared this idea with me. Richard, we're going to implement that. Now, Richard, I know you're not a short man, but on that day, how tall would you have felt?
Yeah.
And at first opportunity, you're on a ship, so I don't know how quickly you can call mama, but at first opportunity, you're calling mama and telling her, you won't believe it. We had a whole meeting. The captain asked me to stand up. And as soon as mama hangs up from you, she's calling 10 of her friends and tell them the story. Well, you understand how morale, but that's what you were doing in terms of, hey, how'd we get here? And what are we doing right? What needs to change? And listening.
Yeah, and I've seen the difference. If you come in with all the answers, your staff are going to just sit back and watch and wait for you to come up with all the solutions. You start asking questions, you start welcoming them into the part of the process, part of the solution, and now they're putting their shoulder to the weight as well, and it's not just you carrying all the weight. And but it's it's a different mindset, and I think even some of our listeners, perhaps today, you might be thinking to yourself, I wish I'd heard Bob in this podcast 20 years ago. I think I'm more the other kind of stereotype, and now it's me sitting there in my office trying to find all the solutions myself. What would you just encourage people if you've not been really leading with questions in the past? Can you make that transition? Can you change?
No. Well, Richard, whenever I speak, I ask my audience, who here would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds? Every hand goes up. And I say the reason I ask this is I often sense that people would like to learn to lead with questions, but they imagine they'll have to get a master's degree in questionology. Nice idea. So when they hear 30 seconds, it's like, sign me up. Well, Richard, you're my audience today. So I bring somebody up and I say, I've selected Richard because I think he has a photographic memory. He's only going to have to hear my 4 favorite questions once and he'll have them memorized. And so I have a second hand on my watch, and Richard, the clock starts when I say my first favorite question. I'm going to share all 4. I'm then going to say, do you have them memorized? You will. And I'll say, share them with us. And when you share all 4, successfully the clock ends. So here we go, Richard. My first favorite question is, what do you think? Second, what else? Third, what else? Fourth, what else? Do you have them memorized?
I think so.
Share them with us.
Yeah, what do you think? And then what else? What else? What else?
Oh, man, a
Yeah.
new world record. We got that done in 11 seconds. Now,
Yeah.
some of the audience are a little skeptical, like, Bob, you can't ask somebody, what do you think? What else? What else? What else? And I said, well, not in that rapid fashion. It's a conversation. First of all, you're going to add a topic. Hey, what do you think we ought to do about? And then you're going to listen. Well, research shows that when we're asked to give input on an opinion kind of question, we instinctively roll out a safe answer. We're testing the waters. So if I said, Richard, what do you think about? And you give me that first answer, and I say, well, Richard, that's stupid. Everyone knows that. You're sorry you answered. Next time I'll get nothing. But when I say, wow, Richard, that's good. What else? Well, you relax. Bob appreciates what I'm sharing, and now you'll give me more.
Yeah.
And even then I don't move on. I say, wow, Richard, I've got to grab a pen. This is so good. I've got to take notes. Please continue. What else? And what
Mhm.
I've discovered is you get to their gold nugget, their very best thought, with the third and fourth question. And
Mm.
remember, the promise here was, who here would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds? Richard, again, I shared that I'm a farm boy. If leading with questions was complicated, I couldn't do it. The reason I can do it is so many of the best questions are so simple. They
Mhm.
are, hey, whatever the topic is. Hey, Richard, what do you think we ought to do here? Wow,
Mhm.
that's good. What else? And what else? And what else? And that leader who's only led by telling, if they'll just imagine their next meeting with a staff member one-on-one or with their team around their table, just using these 4 questions can move them from leading by telling to leading with
Mm.
by asking.
And I think for some folks, we just need to we need to just relax and realize that if someone comes up with an idea that maybe we don't like, we don't agree with, you don't have to begin arguing or correcting. You're not obligated to necessarily do everything that they're saying. I tell people just chill out. Like you're
Yeah,
not threatened. The whole organization is not in peril because someone shared an idea that won't work with you. And you're right. I think sometimes if you just kind of just keep listening, now you're going to go back to your office and you're going to sort through that. You're going to you'll separate the wheat from the chaff and some of what was shared with you. But oftentimes, like you said, you got to get by maybe the first safe answer to get to the nugget, and that's all you're really looking for is the nuggets.
yeah,
So they might have shared 4 things, but that fourth one is a real keeper. And so, yeah, but I know some people that just almost out of principle, they feel they have to correct any misconceptions and inadequacies, and you're just shutting it all down. And then you wonder why
yeah.
nobody comes up with ideas, and people aren't jumping out of their seats to answer your questions.
Well,
And so just put it out there. You're collecting ideas, and
yeah,
and
as I mentioned earlier, if you hear an idea that you think, I'm not sure that that's a good one, you can always say, hey, that'd be one option. Would be a couple more,
yeah,
and uh, and just move on,
yeah,
and have them dig a little deeper. And
yeah.
it could well be, as you say, the next option or the third option, the fourth option. You say, wow, I think that one's a winner, and you didn't have to take apart the one that you
Yeah.
didn't think was a winner.
Yeah, yeah, and people, and you kind of want to have that understanding. Just because you shared an idea with me, I've got 100 people in this organization all sharing ideas, so I can't promise you that I'll do all of them, but I'm looking for the gold, and
Yeah,
you develop a track record over time of what there's a number of things people have shared with Richard, and he's done it. He hadn't done it all, but don't have to think very far to think
sure.
of things he has followed up on. So, well, Bob, any last advice you'd have just to leaders in general? I know we have a lot of folks telling us in some ways leadership is the same as it's been for 1,000 years. But on the other hand, there's a lot of new dynamics, a lot of new issues, cultural issues, technological issues that can complicate leadership in one way or another. Any last just
Well,
observations of what you're seeing
one
leaders facing?
yeah, one piece of advice for leaders is And this is also a confession, but if you're a leader who thinks because I'm a leader, I need to have all the answers, I always say, what are you tempted to do when you're asked a question for which you don't have an answer?
Hmm.
Well, I know. I used to make them up on the spot.
Yeah.
And my kind staff never actually called me on it, but I'm sure some of them were thinking, I don't think Bob knew. I think he just made it up. Well, today, Richard, I'm actually prepared to respond to any question I'm asked, but not with an answer, but with some questions. So Richard shares a question with me. I say, wow, Richard, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. What do you think the answer might be? And many times they actually have an answer. But Richard may respond with saying, well, Bob, I don't know either. That's why I came to you. Well, Richard, you're asking a terrific question. It sounds like neither one of us has the answer. How could we find out the answer? And almost always they will say, well, so-and-so might know, or there's this book, or I could do a search on Google. And I'll say, Richard, would you go do that research? Because it will be helpful to us to know that answer. Would you go do that research and bring it back?
Hmm.
And I also say, if you have a leader who, when they don't know the answer, says, I don't know that answer, are you actually trusting them more or less?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's more. And it's also so when they say, oh, I do know the answer to that, you actually trust their answer more because you know that when they don't have the answer, they just have the freedom to say, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Which, it works both ways. But I would say that's a great piece of input for leaders is get unburdened with the heavy burden of thinking you need to have all the answers. You just need a few of the questions.
Yeah. And just as complicated as life can be these days, anyone who talk like they do have all the answers, you know that
Yeah.
that they're not telling the truth because it's impossible. And that's why you need the whole group thinking, not just the leader. Well, I knew that our time would go by quickly. There's so many really important, relevant issues here, and I think just all of us at some level can be better at asking questions and just being in that posture as we lead. And so I encourage folks, check out the various books. You probably had no idea that Jesus asked that many questions, and that might just make a great study, Bible study, even just going through some of the questions. I've actually preached a sermon series before on the questions of Jesus, and there's some great ones. Questions have a way of just kind of laying people bare, just
Yeah.
getting you right to the surface there, cutting through all the surface stuff. And so encourage you to check out Bob's materials and just all the various sources of social media and so on. We'll post all of that. But Bob, I appreciate you and wow, just you're sort of my model of sticking somewhere for a while and investing your life and appreciate just just the way you keep growing and writing and producing, just year in and year out. That's wow. I think that's what ministry is supposed to look like. Just fruitfulness year in and out. And so, thanks for being with us.
Richard, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed our conversation. Blessings on you, dear brother.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.